Can you give me screen share privileges?
Of course. There you go.
Jim, it said you took over as the presenter after I shared it. And it unshared. There we go. Okay, it's coming back. There we go.
I'm going to give it just like 2 more minutes, see if we can get some more folks to trickle, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, everyone, we'll go ahead and get started. And just want to say thank you guys for coming on such short notice. I am grateful that we had the opportunity to meet, even though we had to reschedule last week's meeting. Do any of our tri-chairs want to say something?
Hey, Caitlin, this is Bobby Pettis. I'll go ahead and jump in, and I'll add I'll add the same thanks for everybody jumping in short notice. I know some won't be able to attend today, and I think Caitlin's going to send out the link later to some notes or maybe even a recording. And looking forward to getting started and some more good discussion. And I hope whether it's Caitlin or Jim, somebody will provide us an update as to where we are and give us some feedback on the lost week or time in scheduling and how we can catch up and still meet our objectives. Thanks.
Thank you, Bobby. Mr. Jim Campbell or Miss Amy Putney, would you all like to say anything to welcome everybody?
Welcome, everybody. Same thing Bobby said. You know, tough times and scheduling, all that kind of stuff. But we'll get this done. We'll play catch up as we need to. And so thank you for participating.
No further comment. I think they said it just perfectly fine.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone. And I'll turn it over to Jim to get started.
All right. Thank you all. And I hope, again, everyone, last week was certainly challenging for all of us, and it certainly was eye-opening, you know, for a lot of the suffering, but also for the challenges in our infrastructure that, you know, came about out of that. And I think tomorrow's hearings in the legislature are going to be must-see TV, but you know, we're not here about that right now. But anyway, I'm just glad everyone's okay and move forward and hopefully everything will be better. Let me just say a few things and just a reminder about our planned purpose. Next slide. So, you know, as we've shown you every time we get together, we just want to make sure that this process is to identify your concerns and preferences and really create this vision for the corridor that'll guide future improvements and funding for the corridor. So again, this is the start of a process. And I will say that there's some work going on in my house in the background. So if you hear a little bit of hammering and things like that, that's what's going on. Next slide, Chelsea. And again, a reminder that, you know, this is twofold: restoration of the corridor and of the creek and the environment around it. And not only restoration, but preservation of that corridor. Because again, as we've said, it is one of the most natural corridors in the entire region and is within the urban area. And so that sort of sense of how do we keep it like that, and then layer on top of that all the other things that we want to. But that restoration and preservation is really important to this. So that's our purpose. And then as a committee, next slide, Chelsea. Again, you're helping us with this initial visioning. Certainly this is not the end of the road here. This is just the beginning of all this, but helping us begin to put this initial vision together and serving as a link for many of your neighbors, businesses, others in the area. And then, you know, again, as this will ultimately benefit everyone that lives in the San Antonio and the Bexar County region. So this is a great opportunities for both locally and then as the bigger area as we move into funding and implementation strategies that'll come about. So with that, let me just tell you a little bit about where we are in the process. And next slide, Chelsea, thank you. So we late last year, we got things kicked off. We got started on this, and we've been working on developing the strategy of this community vision. And now, based on what we heard from you, especially with these sector meetings, now we're moving into the kinds of recommendations and ideas, the starting point and those ideas. We'll share some of those with you in a little bit. And that's the kind of the beginning of the framework for these recommendations. Now, again, because of the time frame we have with getting this process, and again, this is tied to funding that may become available through Bexar County in a very short period of time. And so in the next month or two or a couple of months, we want to get some ideas on the table and get that sort of initial vision on the table. As I said, it's not the end of this. It's really just something that puts something in place, and then we can build on that and over time as it moves forward. So right now we're in that phase 3 area where we're looking at those framework recommendations, and ultimately then this goes after you all are comfortable with it. It goes to the SARA board, and then ultimately it goes to Bexar County, who will review it as well in a relatively short period of time. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to you. Well, I'll just summarize real quickly just our engagement activities. So we had those initial meetings with you, the subcommittee meetings, and a lot of great feedback that you gave us in those meetings. And so one of the things we'll ask you to look at today as we show you some of those initial recommendations and framework ideas, we want to make sure that you see the connection back to what you told us about and you talked about. And then we're looking for areas where you can see that we need to add on to those ideas that are being presented to you. So that's kind of a summary of where we are now. I'll turn it back over to Caitlin. She's got some cool things to show you with the potential logo. Again, branding is really important for this, and just getting a sense of something that people can identify with. So Caitlin, turn it back to you.
All right, thanks everyone. Chelsea, if you could move to the next slide so we can show the logo. So we took everybody's feedback that we received from the last few committee meetings. We picked the color scheme that the committee really liked, and then, you know, added in a person participating on the trail, adding in some wildlife along the creek, and made the trees look more native to what is currently on the creek. This is our final rough draft. Does anybody have any comments, concerns? It won't typically be this big always. It'll be smaller on most of the other items, but we just wanted to give you all the full views. You'd be able to see it up close.
Looks nice.
Thank you, Ed. Any other comments, folks? All right, well, I think we'll go ahead and keep this as the final. If there are no complaints, then we'll go ahead and use that as our logo. So thank you, everybody. All right, back to you, Jim.
Right, and again, there's noise going on in the background, so I'll be real quick and then I'll mute again that. But we did when we met as subcommittees, we had real good feedback from all of you from the different areas. And by the way, before I do that, Chelsea, can you take over and just recap this section because I've got a lot of noise in the background?
Yeah, not a problem. I can take over. We just wanted to give, before we really jump into the meat of today's meeting, which is going over our proposed recommendation framework and getting your feedback, we would just love to hear. We can start with each of the tri-chairs, and then if tri-chairs, if anyone else from your subcommittee wants to chime in, we just want to spend a few minutes per segment and really hear from you about your takeaways from those segment meetings, what you learned, what you thought was interesting, and just kind of report back to the larger group. So we can start with, we can go backwards, or I think, Bobby, are you south? I can't remember which one. Are you central?
The north part.
Oh, you're north. I'm wrong. So, well, perfect. Then we'll start with you since you're north.
Since my mute worked. Well, a quick recap. First, it was super engaging. Everybody showed up. Everybody participated. There was a lot of discussion, just kind of on awareness, and so it kind of ranged from everything from our entertainment district adjacencies in learning about what's happening, whether it's rodeo or Willow Springs or AT&T Center, to the natural piece. I appreciated some of the feedback that we had on just the beautification and natural side, and then as we kind of continued through the small business impact that we also heard about. Tuesday had some good insights as we talked about what the future could look like, but I would certainly open it up and let anybody else that attend those meetings comment and fill in the gaps.
Okay, well, if we don't hear anyone else from the north, we can move on to the central subcommittee.
Caitlin, let me ask you a question real quick. So, Bobby, how far downstream does the north segment? I don't remember exactly. Does the north segment go?
Recall correctly, I want to say is it Pletz Park? Just right south of Pletz Park. I think I pronounced it correctly. And so that's that segment from Jack White Trailhead, all the way south, which would encompass, IH-35 all the way almost to WW White, I guess. But I'd ask for.
I think Houston, right, was the boundary for the north segment. Yeah.
Yeah, we're generally saying the AT&T Center area as the boundary.
Yeah.
Well, and the reason I ask is just that it's obvious that you need to focus a lot on the entertainment related stuff and the golf course and so on and so forth. I was just wondering if y'all got into any more of if you talked about the downstream aspect of it.
You know, there was some discussion about really, I would say, the beautification as a whole, Jim. You know, as we kind of talked about it, it's, you know, really, and this is kind of personally for me, just really trying to understand some of the things that, you know, Sarah has done in the past on some of the other waterways for beautification and maintenance. And then we talked about some specific structures, some historic structures that are on that north segment that were identified for future opportunities, whether it was, you know, place finding, and then some of the, you know, opportunities just for improve signage, you know, and modernized signage, shall I say, you know, whether it's QR codes or, you know, hotspot sections or things like that.
Thanks.
Well, our Central and South subcommittee chairs, Renee and Jane, are not able to make it today, but does anyone that sat in on the Central subcommittee meeting would like to share anything, any takeaway or a quick summary of the meeting? Caitlin, I can't see the whole list. Do you know if anyone from the Central segment is on?
Yeah, I don't want to call folks out.
Yeah.
I actually don't think that we have anyone from the Central Committee on, but we do have folks from the Southern.
Okay. Yeah, and I won't give a full recap. And the Central has probably the most neighborhood connectivity, and so we talked a lot about the surrounding neighborhoods and a lot about culture and history and incorporating that into the corridor. And so that was some of the main discussion. But we can move on to the South segment if anyone wants to chime in about their experience with that subcommittee meeting.
Sure. Yeah, I'll chime in a little bit. I think that at the end of the meeting, and I can't actually remember which the final three were, but I think you all selected three sort of final takeaways or priorities for the Southern section, and I think it represented it pretty well. I think there was a big interest in the, you know, some of the specific natural features of that section. Including those little spring-fed wetland areas. I think there was a concentration on the history of the community and of that area, and definitely some need to focus on safety and making sure people feel safe in that section. Those were kind of my three takeaways, and I think that was pretty representative. I think there was maybe one other priority that I'm not remembering right now, but I think that was generally the takeaway.
Great, thanks, Forrest. Well, if there's no one else that wants to jump in, we're like Caitlin said, we're not going to call on anyone, so let's just jump right into our recommendation framework so we can spend time hearing from everybody. It might seem like a lot to digest up front, but we've tried to break it into manageable sections for us to talk about. And so we wanted to present it to you first. And then after this meeting, Caitlin is going to send the whole recommendation framework, including some introduction text and how to use the document in a PDF format. And so we would ask that you spend some time with that, look at it. Obviously, we want to hear your feedback here at this meeting, but as you spend time with those recommendations, if you want to type up some potential edits or comments or mark them up, we're more than happy to take your comments that way. But really, it starts kind of to simplify it in three ways. So when we have a final document at the end of this visioning process, I like to think of it kind of as a funnel. We started with a lot of public engagement and it's, there's a lot of things that are similar in the public engagement that we've heard from each committee, but then there's a lot of stuff that's all over the place. So we try to, how do we condense that down into manageable themes that we can use? So then we've created input themes, which we'll talk about. And then from those themes, we have 10 priorities. And so these priorities, similar to goals, but since this plan is very actionable, we're calling them priorities because they're things that are very important and they are ranked. And so from those priorities, have recommendation sets. And so you can see that we started, big picture vision at our first meeting, and every meeting we just keep getting further and further down into these recommendations. But we feel that it clearly shows how the public input was used. So that's how recommendations are set up. Now, keep in mind, the document you get will not be the final plan, but it outlines the recommendations. And so Forrest, as you mentioned, in the document, there will be text and supporting recommendations for specific segments and priorities for each segment. But this document talks about the segment as a whole, but it does also tag certain actions with certain segments. But overall, as an entire corridor that we're studying, we felt like these 7 themes that you see on the screen summarized or created buckets for all of the recommendations that will tie back to the input that we heard from you all, the things that you thought were important. And so those are restoration, recreation, safety, education, connections, catalysts, and history. And so I'll go through those a little bit. Restoration is obviously probably one of the most obvious, and that is focusing specifically on the creek and the surrounding natural habitat and how to restore it, how to preserve it, and how to ensure that this natural asset to San Antonio is preserved for years and years to come. And so that could be things like bank stabilization, trash cleanup, water quality, but all going back to the natural environment. And then recreation, kind of like you saw in that triangle pyramid that Jim showed earlier, recreation focuses on the usability of the corridor. So whether that's things along the trail or amenities around it, things that people are doing and ways to recreate and enjoy the natural environment. Safety is pretty self-explanatory. There's lots of recommendations related to safety. And so we felt like that was important enough to have its own bucket. Education is kind of twofold. That's educating people about the environment itself and understanding how the impact of surrounding uses have on the creek. So whether that's educating businesses or landowners, but also educating youth and users on this natural feature and understanding how everything's interconnected. And so that could be through a number of recommendations that we'll show you here. The fourth is connections, and connections again talks about 2 different things. That's physical pedestrian connections. How do people get to the trail so that it's usable, or get to the corridor, I should say, and move around the corridor, but also how are the adjacent land uses connected. And so we have a bucket dedicated to that. The 5th is catalysts. This refers to more of economic drivers, economic development. So we've heard that we kind of see this corridor as a spine through this part of San Antonio. And so any recommendations related to economic growth or things that could spur economic growth would go into this bucket. So it's kind of like, how would some of these recommendations cause positive spillover into the surrounding areas? And then not the least important, these buckets are not ranked, but the 7th is history. And so this encompasses all the history and culture recommendations. So and it kind of ties in with education, but from learning about the history of the neighborhoods, the history of the corridor, to also celebrating historical events that have happened in the area, we felt that was very important to have its own bucket. Before I move on to actually going through each of the 10 priorities, I just wanted to stop here and pause and see if anybody had any questions about these themes. And really just, I guess I'll pose the question, from everything you've heard in our meeting so far, and your ideas about the corridor, do you feel like these 7 buckets represent a good framework to categorize our recommendations?
Hello, everyone. My name is Carla Walker. I'm new to your group, and this is my first meeting, so I'm kind of on a late show and trying to jump in and talk about my excitement about being part of the Salado Creek restoration, because I live on the east side of San Antonio in District 2. And so being a vice chair with the MLK Commission, we featured the Salado Creek in our film at the very beginning, and everyone is asking me, where was that in San Antonio? Was it on the Riverwalk? And I'm like, no, it's Salado Creek. And they were like, Salado Creek, you know? So it's just beautiful how that bridge looks in there. It's already uplifting the area. I know about the history of churches. Matter of fact, one of the churches I belong to used to have their baptismals at that Salado Creek area near AT&T Center. And so being born and raised here, I'm very sensitive to the Salado Creek area because it has been an eyesore. And also some other things, you know, in the safety area, that was a very big concern. So I'm so glad to see these things as part of the input themes, because they're major and they're all right there. And so you all have done an exciting, wonderful job at presenting those areas to be part of this input for the themes that you're looking at. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. And I think we failed to introduce you at the beginning. I know we were able to fill some open spots, and Caitlin worked hard. And so thank you for Ms. Walker for joining us. We're glad to have you at any point in the process. Your input is very valuable.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Walker. And also we have another new candidate, if you would like to introduce yourself, Ruben.
Yes, good evening, I should say. Yes, this is also my first meeting. My name is Ruben Guerrero, and I also have been in the neighborhood since high school, moved away, came back, and now I'm living pretty much down the street from the Freedom Bridge. So the opportunity to serve on this committee was very interesting to me. So I can bring to the committee some also background knowledge about the proposals for different improvements. I've gone to meetings having to do with the park recreation committees that have brought suggestions such as educational exhibits along the MLK portion of the creek. There have been suggestions of having actual fishing piers for citizens to be part of. I even saw a neighborhood activist today. He had a sign out. He was proposing a fundraising effort to have a miniature train installed into the Martin Luther King route. So there has always been a desire to improve Salado Creek along the way, and I'm very excited to know that this committee is being formed so that the full extent of the creek becomes another attraction for the city, and I think that's going to be very important, and hopefully we will all come out with great ideas.
Thank you both. We are extremely lucky and appreciative to have your historical and knowledgeable context here in this committee. Bobby, I believe I saw that you were unmuted. Did you have something? Am I just calling you out?
I think I'm going to pause and I'm going to let you guys keep on moving.
All right, Chelsea, back to you.
Okay, thanks everyone. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through each of the 10 priorities. So it'll be a little chunk of me talking. So please please bear with me, and then I want to turn it over to y'all. And the reason I want to do that is because sometimes if we just go piece by piece and you don't know what's ahead, I want you to see the full picture of the 10 priorities, and then we can go back and start talking about each one. Now, please keep in mind, this is not the final draft. We want you to give feedback when Caitlin sends you that document. We want you to spend time with it. These are the base recommendations. The final report will have, of course, more detail, images, maps, but this is kind of the initial glance at the recommendation framework. So if I can switch here. So we came up with 10 plan priorities, and I'm just going to go ahead and read them, and then we'll jump in. These are ranked in order of importance, or not in order of importance. Every priority on here is important, but in order of what needs to happen first to ensure that some of the other priorities can be implementable, and also from a timing perspective. So the first is to improve and maintain the creek's water quality. The second, to stabilize the bank of the creek. The third, to create and improve habitats for wildlife along the creek corridor. 4, protect the creek corridor from invasive species. 5, create additional pedestrian connections to the creek corridor. 6, celebrate the cultural and historical aspects of the areas adjacent to the creek corridor. 7, provide safety features along the creek corridor. 8, coordinate with the adjacent developments and land uses to ensure protection of the creek. 9, create space for future recreation amenities along the creek corridor. And 10, incorporate technology and educational features into the creek corridor to enhance the visitor experience. And so this are the top, are our 10 priorities that we are building our recommendation structure around. And so as we move into each one, I'm going to hit on these. What you'll see in the document that Caitlin provides you, it's actually very graphic in terms of it. Each priority has its own matrix, and next to each recommendation are the icons of the input themes. And so you can see how each recommendation ties to one or more of the input themes. But for today's meeting, we want to focus on just kind of the initial idea of each recommendation. The document also says which segment or segments the recommendation ties to, and then also a general time frame. So starting with priority number 1, the first would be, let me move this, I have y'all's faces up, let me move it out of the way so I can read all this. With priority number 1, improving and maintaining the creek's water quality. And this one is very important because the creek is one of the reasons that that corridor is there. And the water quality of the creek has so many implications on the natural environment, downstream uses, and then just the overall usability and beauty of the area. And so we've come up with 4 recommendations related to water quality. And that is to identify locations and methods to reduce sedimentation. And so that is both within the creek and also before that stormwater reaches the creek. The second is to identify major trash generators along the creek corridor, and then to develop an educational plan. And so this educational plan would be for all property owners adjacent to the creek. And so that would be to help them understand the impact of their use. We know that in a lot of these areas, there's a lot of industrial uses that have been there a long time and may not be subject to some of the standards that new development is. And so this is an educational plan for working with Sarah working with the city and adjacent property owners to help improve water quality.
But Chelsea, if I can jump in quickly, so it's also beyond that. It's also the visitors and others who, just don't understand that they might be contributing to the trash and other things that affect the water quality. So it goes well beyond just the folks who live around there. It's really more about the outside factors that contribute to the water quality in the creek.
Yes, definitely. And then similar to what Jim just said, taking that even a step further, we developed recommendation C, and that is actually a plan for educational signage, not just in the corridor, but in some of the parks and at the trailheads. That is where most people start their time when they're recreating in the area. They start at a park, they start at a trailhead, and even actions that happen at the park, trash, litter, other things can affect the water quality. So working on signage to create that education about the connection between the users and the water quality. And then D would be partnering with local organizations for periodic trash removal. We know that there are already programs that are doing this, and so this recommendation would be to continue those programs, to assist in those programs, to beef up those programs, and to help assign funding for some of those existing efforts, including adding more waste receptacles along the creek corridor. So you can see that priority 1 starts with a lot of ongoing programs, but they are vital to the life of the corridor, to the water quality. So things that are very scientific and engineering related, from sedimentation and erosion control, all the way to just simple things like partnering with organizations and cleaning up trash. So I actually had a thought, since I already kind of showed everyone the 10 recommendations, it might be best to kind of stop at each priority now and talk about if you as the committee, if you all think that these 4 recommendations, given that there will be more detail in the plan, but that the idea of these 4 recommendations achieve this priority number 1, which is to improve and maintain the creek's water quality. Is there anything that, when you see this, that you're like, I like that, or this could be tweaked, or something's completely missing?
I have a question. I see the focus on trash, which is great, but on number 1, where you say reduce the sedimentation, I'm assuming that you're sort of looking at those contributors within the watershed that may not be, maybe back from the actual banks of the creek, but that are contributing to water quality challenges to the creek, like parking lots or other areas, that we would work with those landowners to see if there are ways to incorporate low impact development or other strategies to not only reduce the source of pollutants, other than that I know about the trash, but just other water quality threats, as well as slowing down any velocities that could be coming from that adjacent development.
Yeah, Suzanne, you said it wonderfully. Aaron Teague, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
The intent is, we're really capturing the priorities that were expressed within the subcommittee, is to look at the corridor holistically, as Suzanne mentioned, for the properties that are maybe not immediately adjacent, but they do have a large contribution to the creek. Not just for maybe trash, but other types of pollutants, or in some cases, it's the runoff dynamics that impact the creek, cause erosion, which then leads to that excess sedimentation or other pollution. So it's really a holistic view that we were trying to go for to capture what the subcommittees were trying to tell us.
Okay.
I think there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity to even make this be a catalyst effort where it's really a demonstration. Because I know this is one of the goals of the River Authority, is really to improve water quality everywhere. And so the whole notion of development sort of responding and helping, or existing development and anything new that happens is really fundamentally kind of potentially part of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, my comment's not dissimilar on 1B. I mean, maybe it's just a modification of the word change, as opposed to major trash generators. I do think it's a broader concept. the sustainability opportunities that might exist along the creek. And that way, maybe it's, as mentioned earlier, whether it's water quality, trash, refuse, I'm not sure what it is, but I would like to just see that word change.
Yeah, noted.
Then another question, just the funding source we've talked about earlier on. So there's whatever those opportunities that are going to be provided through the county in the form of their C of O on, their flood tax. But do these priorities line up with those funding sources that might be available, and then funding sources that might present themselves to be available in alternate forms, whether that's May 22 city bond election, whether that's the new CARES funding legislation that's being discussed right now. And so priority alignment, I guess what I'm trying to say is that we ought to think about aligning the priorities with available source of funds, because those funds sometimes are restricted.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I agree, Bobby. Part of the issue why that's a little hard to do right now is we haven't really nailed down the funding. We're having conversations with county staff and commissioners that are ongoing. And however, until we really are able to nail down where that's coming from, it would be difficult to move in that direction. However, when we get that information, we can definitely frame the priorities along that line. I think that's a really good point.
No, couldn't agree more. And so hopefully we'll be able to pivot quickly if there's a new opportunity that presents itself.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I also wanted to make a comment about the 1A and 1B. I can attest to the runoff of stormwater, because our particular neighborhood, which is Eastwood Village, is right alongside the creek. And for the longest time, runoff from that neighborhood would contribute to stormwater reaching the Salado Creek. And so part of that package for that bond for drainage and flood control included improving that area that had the water draining into Salado Creek. So right now they're right on the edge of completing the entire project, which started 2 years ago. And so they included an overfall channel there that will protect the creek from further erosion and any kind of storm water or debris reaching the Salado Creek. And as far as the property owners along that creek corridor, the residents along Upland Road pretty much take care of their property. However, there is an alleyway behind their homes that a lot of people from outside the neighborhood, they come and dump their trash, their sofas, their furniture. There was even a time when they found stolen vehicles back there. So what ended up happening, I contacted Channel 5 and the councilman at that time, and we had a city effort to go in there and clean up that entire junk area before it got too bad and before it really did make a serious impact on the creek itself. So yes, these are definitely priorities that need to be made while we still can.
To Mr. Pettis' point about additional funding, we've actually directed, at the River Authority, we have directed the government relations team, including our lobbyist in Washington, D.C., to work with the county's government relations team and their lobbyist in Washington, D.C., on the possibility of identifying funds in the stimulus packages that are being sent down to the local level. So we're hopeful that there may be funding from those sources. And then the other thing I would add is on 1D, the River Authority has a very well-established program, what we call watershed warriors that do many things. They're volunteers, but one of the things they do is they help the Sarah staff with trash pickup and things of that nature. So, so we can look at that model possibly as a way to engage on 1D.
Great. No, that's good information.
I had one small comment on the 1D as well, which was this may be somewhat implied, but I think coordinating with the city and city parks, since they already maintain the parks and as a handoff to any program that gets created, I think will be real important on the front end, especially for anything that's meant to be reoccurring over time.
Well, that's great. Now, these are all great comments and just what I'm looking for and kind of your initial feedback. And then, like I said, it's not the last time you'll see these. And you'll notice that the first 4 are more restoration focused, and that's because that's very critical to ensuring that some of these other things like recreation and amenities can happen. So moving on to 2, we move away from water quality, and priority 2 is to stabilize the bank of the creek. And so you can see here the 3 recommendations. The first one that is based around establishing natural reinforcement. And so that's by using the target application of streamside vegetation, native aquatics vegetation, and you can see some examples there. And then also identifying where those natural reinforcement areas may be appropriate. It might not be appropriate everywhere. The second is identifying the appropriate locations for stream bank stabilization. And then C, studying the creek to determine if there is a need to implement any in-stream structures to restore its ability to convey the flow and the sediment. So I know this one is very technical, but I know we do have people like Aaron on the phone that can help answer any questions about bank stabilization in this priority. So I'll turn it back over to the committee for any similar thoughts, initial reactions.
There's definitely going to be some areas that need some stabilization. I know alongside the Martin Luther King Park, there's still fallen trees, debris from previous floods, and it's going to take some serious restoration to have that water flow a lot more easily through there. But even past Martin Luther King Park, heading towards the Southside Lions Park, there's some areas there that definitely need some stabilization. So definitely this is going to be another important priority.
Just a quick question. Have we, as part of this, are there opportunities to see if, like I said, in the first one, what was more water quality, but in this second one being stabilization, does most of the velocity that's coming through the creek that's causing some of the erosion, is it all coming from upstream, or are there local contributors like outfalls that are coming in with strong velocities that could be adjusted to not, like sometimes the outfalls come out and straight go across the creek, and the velocities of that outfall may end up hitting the other bank, and if it was just adjusted, if there was any kind of infrastructure changes that could reduce the influences of erosion. I'm just curious if that would be looked at as part of a change in any kind of actual outfalls that are coming in and the impact that they're having, like dissipators or slightly adjusting the outfall structure so that it doesn't cause some of the bank erosion. I'm just curious if there's any localized issues or if it's mainly just coming from the velocities from upstream.
Suzanne, that's a great point, and something that we would delve into with a lot of detail during the design process. But anecdotally, just from visual inspection, the question about whether it's a in-stream velocity issue or whether there's small inflow issues, visually we can see that it's both.
Okay.
There are a number of locations where you have those small inflows, sometimes larger inflows, that have erosion that's working its way up away from the stream to those small drainage or tributary areas.
So would it be appropriate here to add another part of stabilization is sort of to look to examine and adjust as necessary the actual outfall structure that are the design of those structures? I mean, they're not really natural. They're more gray infrastructure, but they could be contributing to some of the problem in some of these cases.
We could definitely add something in as investigate drainage infrastructure impacts and make recommendations.
Okay. That would be helpful because, you know, there could be some of that could help as well.
Excellent. We'll try to put something together and offer it for wordsmithing and review.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Well, just to keep us moving so we can hit them all and then circle back, I'll move on to 3 if there's no objections. 3 is create and improve habitats for wildlife along the creek corridor. So now we move to the natural environment in and around the creek. The first recommendation being to look at inventorying. So look at inventorying the existing wildlife that is present and native wildlife that is also not present, and what their requirements are and ways to promote and deter certain species. So really kind of getting a good feel for the current conditions and who's there and who's missing. The second being identify existing areas that should be protected, as well as areas where habitat should be. So where are those areas where we don't need a lot of don't need development, we don't need a lot of people walking around, and so then C is kind of playing on that, is installing markers and educational signage along the corridor to alert users of those habitats and then how they can interact with them. So what they can or they should or should not do when they're around those habitats. And then D, playing in with is safety. When we install any safety lighting, because we know that's a recommendation that's coming, consider its effect on the natural environment and use appropriate lighting types. So nowadays there's plenty of lighting types that are motion censored so that they're not constantly going, and or they're different lighting fixtures that won't cast a lot of light around the area. And so D is kind of an ongoing almost policy of making sure that the natural habitats are taken into consideration when lighting is installed. So in terms of priority 3, which is creating and improving habitats for the wildlife, do you all feel that these 4 base recommendations meet the intent of the priority? Anything missing, anything stick out to you?
I'm going to say firsthand that there's definitely a wide variety of wildlife because they do enter into our neighborhood from time to time. We've had anything from peacocks to wild turkeys to ducks, cranes. There's definitely families of hawks living there. There's a larger family of vultures living in the area. Just about all types of waterfowl make their way down there. So definitely this is going to be another important priority.
Thank you.
Can you just clarify for me when you say native wildlife that is not present, you mean in comparison to other urban riparian systems within San Antonio?
Yes, and Aaron can probably speak more to this, but the intent was this is, or maybe wildlife that is typically, like you said, in areas like that, or that has been there but is not there anymore. And so kind of figuring out how can you facilitate the native wildlife, or if it's in close by areas, how can you also create space for that those species to have habitat.
So you're going to inventory existing wildlife and then essentially try to set some wildlife-based targets for habitat restoration?
A good example would be to try to restore the habitat of that in conjunction with some of the stability targets of appropriate riparian vegetation that would support the avian communities that would be present naturally, but just because of habitat loss and other factors are not as robust of a community. And this would follow several successful restoration projects such as Mission Reach locally.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I was just asking because I was interested in the scope of what wildlife you were considering. But I think you've sort of answered that. So thank you.
So I guess I had a similar question to Forrest in the way that 3A is worded. I'm just wondering, is it, because this is really where you're doing the inventory, but then you're trying to decide what habitats you would want to restore, right? So that's where that's the restoration component, native that is not present, their habitat requirements, and then you said ways to promote, or would that be to restore? You don't want to bring, technically we want to bring it back to the way it would have been naturally, right? I mean, you're not trying to bring things in that wouldn't have been there before. You're hoping that it's the things that would have been there naturally. So you're trying to pull it back to more of its natural, as close to the natural habitat as. So I'm wondering if the word restore versus promote I don't know, that the word promote, I guess, just seemed a little maybe not the right verb there.
Yeah, no, I like that, Suzanne. I wrote that down. I agree that might not have the right connotation for what the overall intent is.
Yeah. Thank you.
So moving on to 4. 4 is protecting the creek corridor from invasive species. And so this has 2 recommendations. The first being similar to the wildlife species, creating an inventory of native versus non-native species that are present in the creek corridor, and these are plant vegetative species, to have a better understanding of those conditions and then setting targets for removal and plantings. 4B would be then developing a removal and prevention program. So once you have a baseline and have your targets, developing that program, and that program would also include the priority areas and a general timeline. So to ensure that things are done in a timely manner and that everything's coordinated, and to keep the program on track, it's 4B is critical to kind of, before any of this starts, to take a step back and figure out what that restoration of those species are going to look like.
So a comment that I have on this here is that 4 is written that it's looking at invasive species of plants. And I think if that's the intent, then you need to say that, because one of the biggest invasive species that we have to really worry about in the Bexar County area is a 4-legged, the feral hog. It's turning out to be quite the ecological disaster where it's roaming, and it's definitely roaming in this area of Salado Creek. So I think it's more covered by 3. But so I think if we're going to look at invasive species of animals in 3 and plants in 4, we need to make that clear in how we're saying that, or if we're truly talking about invasive species, then on 4 of all things, then we need to identify, plant versus animal, or how we're going to do that.
Yeah, no, that's great feedback.
This might be part of your timeline creation, but one thought that occurs to me, we've got areas in Salado Creek where you've got pretty dense coverage of these invasive species, especially tree species. And so I think part of the removal is going to have to be education as well, because if you start removing that much tree canopy, I think that can be quite a bit of a shock.
Yeah.
I'm thinking some of the areas where it's just kind of solid glossy privet or Chinese tallow. And so I think that would be an important part or component, and to make sure that throughout that process, you're getting kind of feedback from the community as you do that in stages.
Yeah, no, that's great, Forrest. Yeah, that can, especially for the people that live right along, I can imagine, or people that walk the corridor every day and then they start seeing some of these projects happen, it could be shocking. So I've definitely written that down, that any sort of removal program needs to include outreach, especially for people that live right around, and education. So we'll add that. So starting to move away from actual physical restoration, the next set of priorities start to kind of, if you go back to that triangle the pyramid that Jim showed, we're starting to move up in the pyramid and move to some of that recreation. And so priority 5 is creating additional pedestrian connections to the creek corridor. We can't connect every single place along the corridor because this is a natural corridor. We have to limit the amount of connections. Also, there's just some areas that it just can't connect because it's so natural. But additionally, increased connections, though, can tie into the safety that we heard a lot. So the more that people can access the trail or see the trail, I think someone mentioned earlier, there's a whole group of people at a meeting that didn't know where the trail was. And so connections can help to aid in some of that. So the first being to, thank you, Suzanne, so much. Well, be sure to check your email from Caitlin and provide any feedback. The first recommendation being to enhance the visibility of Jack White Trailhead through additional signage and wayfinding. So this is the Jack White Park at the northern portion of our study area. And I'm sure many of you know, you can drive right past it and not even know it's there. And it's a great trailhead, lots of open space, lots of natural areas. And so we really want to focus on how can we get people to know that trailhead's there, and understand that when they're at that trailhead, then to understand where they can go from there. And there are maps and things in there, but enhancing that. Additionally, as we move to B, creating additional trailheads for connectivity, specifically Gembler Road and Roland Road. C would look at increasing connections to the AT&T Center area. So we know that events in the past year or so have kind of waned, but this is an area that's supposed to have a lot of people and events and things going on. And so how can we better connect the corridor to the AT&T Center area? There are some opportunities through the golf course or maybe even the Menger Creek corridor. Right now, when you come out of the golf course and you try to get, or you're on the corridor and you try to get over to the AT&T Center area, say you were going to the Coliseum, there you get off on sidewalks and cross streets, and we want to look at how could we make that connection safer if there were lots of people moving through there. D would be adding an additional connection to the creek corridor from DeFoss Park, specifically in the northern portion of the park. This is a great linear park that runs along the creek corridor. And when you're in the corridor, you can't really see the park. And so we want to look at how we could connect the park to the corridor, which then would open up some access to the corridor for the neighborhoods that are just on the other side of DeFoss Park. And then E, creating gateways at key intersections with streets with unique signage that complements the corridor, but also the abutting neighborhoods. So this is a recommendation that would dive into, when you're not on the corridor, but you're driving on some of those streets, very unique markers that identify the corridor so that you know it's there. but that also complement, like we talked about in our input themes, that may be an event or neighborhood significance. And so this is a very high level recommendation. Obviously it's going to have more detail, but really looking at how we can brand that corridor. So I know that's a lot of stuff, but kind of what are some of your initial thoughts specifically related to pedestrian connections?
Have you guys spoken to the I'm assuming you have, but the City Parks Linear Creekway program and those folks and connections they've looked at in the past? As far as do these dovetail with those? Because I know they're often looking for connection opportunities, and are just a good resource for that. Because they've been connecting the linear creekways and creating new trailheads for a while now. Because my question I'm probably going to ask them is there an additional opportunity for connection for Pecan Valley? And I don't know if there's anybody on the call right now who lives in that neighborhood, right? I don't. But I don't think there's a direct connection right now to the Salado Creek. It's a little bit of a go around to get there. So just something that maybe is worth investigation.
Yeah, no, definitely written that down. Yeah, one thing as we dive in and as we make specific recommendations, we're definitely going to look at some of those plans that other entities, specifically the city, have, just to make sure we're not in complete conflict or anything like that. So thank you for that feedback. Is there anyone from Pecan Valley on the call that might know more about that lack of connection?
I am not necessarily, this is Jennifer. I've joined you a little late, but Jennifer Ramos, obviously I work with HAF, but I do live in the vicinity of Pecan Valley, and I've lived here all my life. So there is a lack of connection. I know there's a development that's trying to get off the ground for many years. And I think it's being sold right now, but they are planning to have a link to that trail through that development to connect that backside of Pecan Valley to the trail system, is what I understand.
Okay. I'll have to look into that. That's great.
So I'm going to jump in on that as well. I think what Forrest and Jennifer have laid out is pretty cool. I mean, we talk about the opportunity for placemaking, and I think this is it, right? As we figure out how we're connecting neighborhoods to Salado Creek, to trailhead. So that 5E is pretty cool. And the 5C as well, I think. And then back to alignment of funding sources, that infrastructure certainly we know eligible for city bond proceeds. And so, that'd be a unique opportunity. And then I'm going to have to cut out a little early. I've got a 6:30 that I got to jump to, but just back to wayfinding. I think it would be a unique opportunity when we look at the rest of our river creeks and river trails in our community. The wayfinding is good, but this is an opportunity to do something different. And whether we're telling stories through some of the modern technology, everybody carries a phone, and with the QR code you can tell a story in English or Spanish, just with taking your phone and clicking on that QR code. So maybe some different things that Salado Creek can be the pilot on for our community.
Yeah, Bobby, I know you said you have to cut out early, so be sure to look at some of the later recommendations when Caitlin sends you the document. I think you'll be interested in one talking about an app that kind of can guide you through the corridor, and it hits on a lot of those things that you mentioned. So.
And I'm sorry, I was trying to jump in. And Bobby, before you head out, I will never go after you because basically you said all the things that I was going to say. So note to self, but good luck in your meeting. But for me, I actually have to run in a minute as well. But the few things that I wanted to mention about this is I'm wondering what is the synergy that's going to look like as far as the themes, right? So you've got all the themes and I see some correlation happening with some of the same ones. So perfect example, safety would be part of this theme as well to me. specifically because that's one of the things that I hear the most. So how are we going to incorporate when there's something that has more than one theme and more than one priority?
Yes, I think I'm going to try to answer that. I may have misunderstood you, but when you see the document, each of these recommendations, or every recommendation will have in a matrix, it will have which of those themes it hits. So next to it, it could be 2 of the circles, because maybe it hits safety and education, maybe it hits safety, education, and restoration. And so you can visually see in the document how every single recommendation hits 1 or more themes, and
That's
then which
was
trail segment it applies to.
Perfect. And then that was the lead into QR code. So basically,
Yep.
my comment is null and void. So thank you, Bobby.
I'll put a check mark by that comment so we know that it's supported.
You go next, first time in front of Bobby.
Well, Bobby, it looks like Bobby's hopping off. So, moving on to priority 6. I know we're losing some people, but again, we ask that when y'all get that document, please spend some time with it. 6 is celebrating the cultural and historical aspects of the adjacent areas. And so we have 3 major recommendations. The first being to establish markers and interpretive signage along the corridor that commemorate and celebrate those events in any neighborhood significance. So this is going to require, further study, further partnerships, committees. We just can't take a guess at what some of those events and significance are. We need to make sure that everyone's at the table. And so again, this is more of an ongoing program that requires a lot of partnerships. Similarly, B, developing a public art program that would showcase public art from residents and groups along the corridor. This could be in many forms: murals, sculptures. There's a lot of ideas around this, but it would be a very cool way to visually tie in and also have, all types of people, all ages involved in that program. And then C, partnering with existing civic and cultural organizations to understand the importance and history surrounding the neighborhoods, and then identifying those leaders, and so those champions. So as you'll see, there's multiple programs, not just from this priority, but from other priorities. And so identifying those leaders so that if there's other committees formed or there's a need for volunteerism, you can have those leaders on hand to make sure that the culture and the history is not being left out of any other types of initiatives. Anything jump out to anybody? Looks good.
When they made the East Houston bridge that goes over the creek, when they were widening East Houston Street and Commerce Street, there was an art project tied to that where they did include some miniature history along the bridge corridor about some of the wildlife that was there, some of the people that are part of that history of the area. So this definitely will help those that are going to be using the Salado Creek corridor. They can be updated to, again, the history of the waterways. So definitely this is going to be part of this priority list.
Okay. 7 is, and we've hit on safety a little bit. 7 is specifically dedicated to safety and providing safety features along the corridor. The first would be studying the feasibility of boosting cellular service along the creek corridor. And so this would increase safety and emergency communications. I know, I can't remember which segment it was. Someone mentioned that call boxes are maybe not a thing of the past, but not as necessarily important to have because most people have some sort of phone with them. But a phone's only good if it will work. And so while call boxes may be something down the road, having good, reliable cellular service in some of those low-lying areas would be very important for safety. B would be potentially studying the feasibility of public Wi-Fi in certain amenity areas, or maybe throughout the creek corridor, to encourage educational opportunities and for technology to be utilized. You'll see in some later recommendations for having educational areas and even an app, a phone application. And so again, not everybody pays for lots of gigs of data on their phone program. And so Wi-Fi could be very critical to some of those educational opportunities. C is just to continue to promote the Trail Steward program and increase it in any way so that safety continues along the corridor. We heard in, I think, almost every subcommittee meeting, the Trail Stewards program came up. And when our team was out there in December, driving in a golf cart along the whole corridor, we saw multiple trail stewards. And so that's a great program, eyes on the trail, eyes on the corridor. And so we want to continue those efforts for safety. And then D is considering additional lighting along the corridor, like I mentioned earlier, that does not negatively impact the environment, but also including a system for reporting any types of outages, because you have great lights, if they're out and you don't know it, then they're not great. So some sort of QR code system so that those outages could be easily reported and acted upon for maintenance. Is there any comments related to just the overall safety of the creek corridor? Any recommendations you feel that might be missing or need tweaked?
After our conversation in the southern section, I did double check with the city's recommendations for how they're developing, and I posed the question whether call boxes were still recommended, and the city still sees some value in call boxes for a few reasons, just as sort of a signal that the area is being monitored. And also for anybody who doesn't have a phone. For example, if children don't have phones, they still have call boxes available. So understanding that you're going to have to look at what's the most effective strategy, I think it is still something that the city is moving forward with. And then on the third, on 7C, my only question is, so the Trail Steward program is a city program that's currently funded by the city, I believe, and is ongoing. And I think currently the Salado Creek area has, they've got 3 trail stewards that patrol that area. If there was a possibility for this project to just increase the frequency or increase the amount of trail stewards, I don't know if maybe, increasing the Trail Steward program could be a goal.
Yeah, I like that. So a way to increase safety would be to actually increase the number of stewards or what times they're out there.
Well, that's what I have heard from folks, was wanting more eyes on the trail. And there are trail stewards out there right now. But if more frequency is better, or perhaps it's better targeted. But since that's a city program, I guess I'm wondering, is Sarah talking about being additive, or is it talking about giving input into the Trail Steward program? What is Sarah imagining its role is in improving the Trail Steward program?
Well, remember, this is a community vision plan, so we would put forward that the community endorses and supports and is advocating for an increase in the community trail steward program. So for this step, it's really getting the awareness and getting it out there that the future of this corridor needs to include that.
Gotcha. So, but this project isn't specifically identifying funds for increasing this trail steward program. It's more of coordinating with the Trail Steward program.
Yes, I think that's a really good way of putting it.
Okay. Yeah. Then maybe coordinating with the Trail Steward program to improve and increase safety.
Yeah.
This is Ed Robertson. The Trail Stewards are actually an all-volunteer force that the city puts out a call for those who want to to be a trail steward, and then they do a little bit of a training for you before you do it. So yeah, they rely strictly on the volunteer. So the more support you could drum up for the trail stewards, the more stewards you might actually get on that section of Salado Creek.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially if as some of these projects take place, if it's a place they want to be, then you can gain more volunteerism. So I'm going to move on to 8, 9, and 10, just so we can have a little bit of time at the end to chat. 8 is focusing on adjacent land uses, so coordinating with adjacent developments and land uses to ensure protection of the creek. We mentioned it early on, talking about water quality and bank stabilization and the flow of the stream, and how a lot of impacts come from the entire drainage area, not just the creek. And so this also can move into some pedestrian connections too. So one kind of big idea we saw when we were out there touring the creek on 8A was, it looks like there was an original bridge from the Redberry Mansion to the Salado Creek Trail. And so we had an idea to outline a recommendation to potentially reconstruct that bridge, because then that actually adds pedestrian connection to that development and the neighborhoods north of the Redberry development. B would be to proactively monitor the industrial uses adjacent to the creek corridor and develop an educational program with those owners, specifically the industrial uses, because a lot of them have been there for a while. And so, as I mentioned, they're not up to some of the development codes that San Antonio might have them develop to today. And so monitoring those different uses, working with the owners, and then, as you'll see in later recommendations, potentially some incentives for bringing their sites up to code in terms of environmental protection. 8C.
Can anybody hear me?
We can hear you.
All right, I was having technical difficulties on my computer, so now I'm trying to phone. This is Oscar Vicks.
Thank you, Mr. Vicks, for joining us.
Okay, go ahead.
8C is considering the impact of existing and future developments on restoration projects, and considering regulatory mechanisms like zoning overlay districts. So this one is very important, because if we move forward with a great restoration plan and those projects happen, but we don't consider the development going on around it, it could potentially inhibit some of those restoration projects. So it's very important that restoration projects look at what's coming through the city of San Antonio's development pipeline, and how they might play into some of those projects. And one way to do that is through overlay districts, which are districts that are on top of existing zoning districts and have some additional requirements. In this case, the idea is that it might be related to environmental protection. And so if you're in a certain area, of course, that recommendation is to be determined what the area might be. You would have to comply with some additional mechanisms to help protect the creek. D is on that same line of coordinating with the city of San Antonio to be a part of the development review process for properties near the creek corridor, and to develop incentives for existing properties to be brought up to code. And so, as I mentioned, if we're trying to look at what's coming down the pipeline, one way is to be a part of that development review process, even not necessarily having to be a part of every meeting and commission meeting and council meeting, but even some sort of system where Sarah becomes aware of or gets pinged when new developments get brought to the city within a certain area around the corridor, so that it's on Sarah's radar. And 8E is to incentivize the use of best practices along the creek corridor to showcase good water quality management and help preserve the creek. So this is a high-level policy to just reinforce the use of best practices in terms of water quality management. So any initial thoughts on priority 8? Still got a little time for 9 and 10. I'm going to get those in there.
I just want to make a comment. I was just chatting with Amy from Commissioner Calvert's office about, at one time, he was proposing a project called River East along the backside of the Redberry property. Don't know if that's still underway or being thought of, but hopefully that would be part of what's going to happen along this restoration project.
I came in a little late, but did we see anything about the restoration of the pavilion that's at the back of Pletz Farm?
We are getting there.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just came
No, you
on,
didn't
so
miss-
I
you
don't
didn't
want
miss
to
it
be
yet.
trying to intrude.
You know, you came on at a good time.
Okay, thank you.
To address the question about River East, I don't want to presume too much, and I see that Amy is still on. But I think in my conversations with the commissioner over the last several years, what we're doing is River East. So yes, I think what we're trying to do is accomplishing what Commissioner Calvert's vision was for River East.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Jim.
Jim. I think you're right on track with that. Okay, so moving to 9 and 10. 9 is creating spaces for future recreation amenities along the corridor. Let me move this box here. So 9A is developing a design scheme for branded pavilions along the corridor for rest and recreation. We didn't specifically identify that pavilion area that was just mentioned. It is very close to the creek, and it could be a potential area for one of these pavilions, but we didn't want to pinpoint that specific one because these areas have to be studied, you know, so that they don't impact the creek, and so the foundations are safe. But 9A would play into that idea of having more places along the corridor to rest and also to recreate, but that they would have some sort of design scheme that also ties in with those gateway markers we talked about. B is studying the feasibility of adding more recreation amenities to the large floodplain area near Jack White Trailhead, whether that's more nature trails or off-road bike paths. If you look on a map, there's a large area in that park. So obviously this would require different partnerships, but it's one idea to help activate the Jack White Trailhead, which was one of our other recommendations earlier on. 9C is developing amenities in the Wheatley Heights flood area. And this is the area that flooded many years ago, and you can still kind of see the street grid on a map. But it could be a really nice natural area then, which would push some recreation amenities closer to the existing neighborhood. And so there's multiple ideas. And so this recommendation will just set a framework. It could be camping, it could be planting arboretum areas, or even areas to access fishing or even game fields. 9 is creating nodes to invigorate areas of the trail that have dead-end streets as a result of previous flooding events. And so that kind of ties into C. There's a lot of those existing right-of-ways that, of course, there's not asphalt on it, but they bump right up to the trail, and so there's some natural space there. And so recommending some ideas for how these spaces could be used, whether it's areas for pop-up food trucks, some of those pavilions we mentioned, or other social gatherings. We're going to look at how those different areas could maybe be used and set a framework. And so these are the kind of recommendations that in the actual final report you'll see maps and pictures to bring some of these ideas to life. And then finally, E for number 9 is developing a system for bike and recreational equipment rentals at some of these major parks. So we heard from committee members the idea of just having more types of things to do, and not everybody is going to own a bike, or if there is opportunities for other types of recreation, it'd be nice to have a way to rent those or have those available. So in terms of amenities and recreation, is there anything that jumps out to you that's missing or that needs tweaked, or any ideas you like?
When you say rental, are we talking private or city or what?
That would be to be determined. We wouldn't get into that level of detail. A lot of bike rental though typically are done through the city. Sometimes they're private or are nonprofit organizations. So it would really just depend on, as we got down the line to this priority, who would be available to help implement that.
If it was private, I would like to see it like the police department, like, you know, they use Dodges so many years and Ford so many years and Chevrolet so many years. I would not like to see one private person monopolize on that. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I know they had mentioned with looking at that trailway with the Parks and Recreation of looking at transportation support, because there wasn't enough bikes that could go on the, buses. So we were looking at areas where they could park nearby and start trying to look at transportation being more suitable for the trailway and for like the Salado Creek restoration. So I know that's on the table with Parks and
that's a very good example of a connection between multiple entities. So if you ride the bus, but you want to then get to the creek and ride your bike, you got to have a way to get your bike on the bus. So that's very good.
On a personal note, I spent a lot of time fishing in the San Antonio River, but I've also fished the Salado a couple of times. And although in its current state, it's not a great fishery, I think with some restoration, it could be much more effective and attractive. And so I see that you've called it out at least once here, but maybe we could emphasize that just a little bit more.
Yeah.
Maybe we can make it like maybe we can make it like some sections of it like Pecan Valley. A lot of people go out to Pecan Valley to fish.
Correct.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I'm writing this down. No, that's good.
I have just one comment on 9A, which is in developing the design scheme. There is there's an overall design scheme for the Linear Creekway, and it would be cool to incorporate and retain that so that there's some continuity between the system. And I'm not even sure you need to add language necessarily. That's more just a comment for the future.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Okay, and finally, number 10, which we made it here right at 7, so we're going to try to wrap up after this, but we still want to have a few more minutes with you. 10 is incorporating technology and educational features into the Creek Corridor to enhance the visitor experience. So 10A is educational signage related to water quality and natural habitats. We touched on that earlier, but this would be where that recommendation is fleshed out a little more. 10B is studying the feasibility of an educational nature center at Southside Lions Park. We know that a lot of people spend time there, and it seems to be a common destination along the corridor, and there is developable land. This obviously would require partnership. C is planning for 1 or 2 areas for natural outdoor classroom areas. So this is not as robust as a nature center, but where kind of education can happen, no pun intended, but education can happen naturally. So if there's a civic organization that needs a space to meet, this would be kind of a natural outdoor area that could be utilized. And then 10D that I talked about earlier before Bobby got off is the recommendation of developing a smartphone application for the Creek Corridor. And this kind of would bring everything together in a technology sense of you could have educational opportunities, safety features, you could have trail maps, amenity maps, ability to call for assistance, uploading photos. There's even ideas of that if somebody would turn their location services on in the map or in the app. Of course, that's completely optional. As you're using the corridor, when you get to certain locations, the app would ping you with fun facts or educational tidbits. And so possibilities are endless with a smartphone app, but we really thought this is a really cool way to tie in kind of all those input themes and as we mentioned, making, taking this a step further and making this trail kind of something that people look at from all over the region and think, wow, that's a really cool program that they have going on. So in terms of technology and education and how those tie together, is there anything from these four that stand out or anything missing in terms of education and technology?
Well, I like that thing out there. I think it's San Fernando where you go in and look at the video and stuff. I wish that we could set up somewhere on the trail, different sections of the trail where you could see the whole trail. Like, you might think you just like your part, but if you saw the other part of the trail, you might want to explore that too. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so giving people a sense of the kind of magnitude of the trail and how many areas there are to explore.
I think the idea of a nature center sounds really exciting, and outdoor classrooms too. That sounds great.
Right. I agree with that. These kids need to get away from these videos.
Well, and if they are going to use a smartphone, at least they could use it on the trail, right?
Well, hopefully
Well, not videos. Excuse my terminology. that game stuff. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Once hopefully the schools are opened and schools like Martin Luther King Academy and Cameron Elementary, that would be part of their activities.
Exactly.
That's right. That's a great idea.
Yep. So I know that was a lot to digest. And so some of these, I failed, Caitlin, to update this based on our conversation. I think some of these meetings are going to get pushed back. So I think we are going to meet again as a committee, probably more like third week in March. We'll get back with you more on that. But before I turn it back over to Caitlin or see if there's any other questions or comments, I'm going to push when Caitlin sends you that document, it takes everything we just talked about. It's in a more visual format. Please spend some time with it and send any comments back to Caitlin. And I've written down all your comments from today, and they're very beneficial. And this is one of the main purposes of this committee, is to give us this feedback that only you as residents and stakeholders in this area can know and provide. So thank you so much for sticking with us through the call and providing the feedback.
And thank you for your effort.
Is part of that package going to include the approval for the logo?
Okay, I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, thank you. The logo earlier.
Isn't that window?
It's in the presentation, which I'm also sending out, so everyone will have a chance to review it closer.
Great, that's what I needed. Thank you.
Of course. All right, everyone. I just want to say thank you again so much. I know that we went on a little long, so I won't keep you much longer, but I really appreciate all of your participation and active interest in this, and your comments have just been so incredibly fabulous. And thank you, Chelsea, for guiding us through this, and Jim as well. If there are any comments, please reach out to me at any time. I'm going to send out all of this information, the presentation, the recording, and the draft vision plan to everyone right after this meeting. So I hope that everyone has a great evening. Stay safe and warm. Director Campbell, is there anything that you would like to say for us to go out on?
No, just thanks everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Could you email me? Everyone, the staff and the members' address? Because when I was having technical difficulties, I couldn't get on, and I ain't know nobody to call. And my wife said, "Look at the old mail," and I just looked at the old mail. And I ain't trying to be funny or nothing, but I'm 70 years old. I ain't all that computer inclined, okay?
Absolutely, Mr. Vix. In the email that I send out, my personal cell phone number and my work phone number are in my signature. So if you have any questions about technical difficulties during these meetings, you can call me and we'll figure it out.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Of course.
And I'm very neighborhood friendly. So Oscar Vix is my neighbor. I don't want him to know I'm here, but I'll help him whenever he needs help getting in touch with you guys.
I don't know
That's
you.
great.
Okay, good. Good.
Thank you all so
Okay,
much.
we'll see.
Yeah, y'all have a wonderful evening.
Bye-bye.